Welcome to this deep dive into one of the most devastating events in recent American history, Hurricane Katrina. As a force of nature that showed no mercy, it swept through the Gulf Coast in 2005, leaving a trail of destruction that still resonates today. In its wake, it claimed the title of the costliest hurricane in U.S. history, a chilling testament to its destructive power. The devastation it wrought was not merely physical, but extended to every facet of life for those in its path, from homes razed to the ground to communities torn apart, and a death toll that shook the nation. The impact of Hurricane Katrina was felt far and wide. This event underscored the vulnerability of our cities, our infrastructure, and our society. Join us as we delve into the timeline of this catastrophic event, its impact, and the lessons it left behind. To understand the full impact of Katrina, we must first take a look at the history of hurricanes in the Gulf Coast region. The Gulf Coast, a region known for its hot and humid climate, is a breeding ground for some of the most destructive hurricanes the world has ever seen. Over the past century, this region has been battered by countless storms, each one leaving its mark on the landscape and the people who call it home. The Gulf Coast has a unique geography that makes it especially susceptible to hurricanes. The warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico fuel these storms, and the flat, coastal plains offer little resistance to the onslaught of wind and rain. Many of the cities and towns along the coast are built on low-lying land, making them particularly vulnerable to storm surges and flooding. New Orleans, a vibrant city known for its music, cuisine, and unique culture, sits in the heart of this vulnerable region. Founded in 1718, the city was built below sea level, sandwiched between the Mississippi River and Lake Pontchartrain. This unique geography, coupled with the city's aging infrastructure and inadequate flood defenses, made it a ticking time bomb waiting for the right storm. In the years leading up to 2005, several significant hurricanes hit the Gulf Coast, serving as stark reminders of the region's vulnerability. These storms caused significant damage, but none could compare to the devastation that was about to hit. Each hurricane served as a warning, a signal that disaster was on the horizon. But despite these warnings, the region remained ill-prepared for what was to come. The vulnerability of the Gulf Coast, and New Orleans in particular, was not a secret. It was a well-known fact, discussed in countless reports and studies. But the scale of the disaster that was about to unfold was beyond anything anyone could have imagined. This vulnerability set the stage for the disaster that was about to unfold. In August 2005, a storm was brewing that would change the Gulf Coast forever. In the Atlantic Ocean, a weather disturbance was forming, growing and gaining momentum. It was given a name, Katrina, a hurricane that would soon etch itself into the annals of U.S. history. But before it became infamous, it was just another storm on the radar. The National Hurricane Center started tracking Katrina from the moment it was born near the Bahamas. As it moved across the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico, it intensified, feeding off the ocean's heat and energy. Meteorologists watched in trepidation as Katrina swelled into a Category 5 hurricane, the highest level on the Saffir-Simpson scale. This scale measures a hurricane's potential for damage, and a Category 5 promised catastrophic outcomes. Meanwhile, the residents of the Gulf Coast were growing increasingly anxious. They knew the destructive power of hurricanes all too well. The memories of past storms were still fresh in their minds, with each one leaving scars on their towns and in their hearts. They watched the news, prepared their homes, and many made the difficult decision to evacuate, leaving behind their lives as they knew them. As Katrina approached, the government authorities activated their emergency response plans. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, known as FEMA, coordinated with local and state officials to prepare for the impending disaster. They established shelters, organized resources, and communicated with the public about the looming threat. But no one, not the meteorologists, the government officials, nor the residents, could predict the sheer magnitude of what was about to unfold. As Katrina neared the coast, it was not just a storm, it was a force of nature about to unleash its fury. As Katrina made landfall, the region braced for what was to come. The arrival of Hurricane Katrina was more than just a weather event. It was a defining moment that would test the resilience of the Gulf Coast and its people, leaving an indelible mark on American history. The storm hit, and the devastation was beyond anyone's worst fears. This is where the narrative of Hurricane Katrina takes a devastating turn. As the hurricane made landfall, the city of New Orleans and the Gulf Coast region faced the brunt of this monstrous storm. The winds were fierce, the rains torrential. New Orleans, a city sitting below sea level, was particularly vulnerable. The storm surge, a wall of water, pushed ashore by the hurricane, was a staggering 27 feet high. The city's defense mechanisms, the levees designed to keep the sea at bay, were simply no match for the onslaught of Mother Nature's fury. One by one, the levees gave way. The water quickly engulfed the city, flooding 80% of New Orleans. Neighborhoods were transformed into a vast murky sea. Streets, homes, and cars disappeared under the water, swallowed whole by the deluge. The extent of the destruction was mind-boggling. Bridges were washed away, roads were torn apart, and buildings were reduced to rubble. The city's infrastructure, its lifeline, was severely damaged. Power lines were down, leaving millions without electricity. Water and sewage systems failed, leaving residents without clean drinking water or sanitation. The devastation didn't stop at New Orleans. The hurricane's wrath was felt along the entire Gulf Coast. From Florida to Texas, communities were decimated, homes were destroyed, and lives were upended. Yet the physical destruction was just the beginning. Behind the broken walls and flooded streets, individuals and families were grappling with the loss of their homes, their possessions, and their sense of security. The emotional toll was just as profound as the physical devastation. In the wake of the storm, the city was left in a state of chaos and disbelief. But as the winds died down and the waters began to recede, another crisis was looming on the horizon. In the wake of the storm, a humanitarian crisis was about to unfold. This was the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, a disaster that shook the nation to its core. In the aftermath of Katrina, thousands of people were stranded, sparking a desperate situation. This was a humanitarian crisis of unprecedented proportions, unfolding in real time on TV screens across the nation and the world. Hurricane Katrina left more than 80% of New Orleans submerged underwater, and tens of thousands of residents stranded in their homes, on their rooftops, or in makeshift shelters like the Superdome and the Convention Center. The images of desperate citizens waving for help from their rooftops, elderly in wheelchairs waiting for assistance, and mothers holding their babies above the floodwaters were heart-wrenching. The rescue operations were colossal. The Coast Guard, National Guard, and countless volunteers embarked on a race against time to reach those still trapped. Helicopters hovered above the city, lowering baskets to hoist people to safety, while rescue boats navigated the flooded streets. Despite the heroic efforts of these rescuers, it was a daunting task. The scale of the disaster, the lack of communication and coordination, and the sheer number of people in need made the rescue operations incredibly challenging. Meanwhile, evacuation centers became overcrowded, under-resourced, and overwhelmed. The Superdome and Convention Center, initially seen as sanctuaries, soon turned into hotbeds of despair. Basic necessities like food, water, and medical aid were in short supply. The conditions were squalid, with sanitation facilities failing and tensions rising. Relief efforts faced their own set of challenges. The scale of destruction, the flooded and blocked roads, and the lack of electricity and communication networks hindered the delivery of aid. Non-profit organizations, community groups, and citizens across the nation pitched in, sending supplies, funds, and volunteers. Yet the need was immense and the response seemed inadequate. Amid this crisis, the government's response was under scrutiny. The slow and seemingly disorganized response provoked anger and frustration. This would lead to a storm of criticism and controversy, which we will delve into in the next scene. The response to Katrina sparked controversy and criticism at all levels of government. A disaster of this magnitude required a swift and coordinated response. However, many argue that the government's handling of Hurricane Katrina was anything but. In the immediate aftermath of the storm, the federal response was criticized for being slow and inadequate. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, bore the brunt of this criticism. Despite having a primary role in disaster relief, FEMA seemed ill-prepared for the scale of Katrina's destruction. Relief supplies were delayed, and there was a lack of coordination between federal, state, and local authorities. At the state and local level, Louisiana's government also faced scrutiny. The evacuation plan for New Orleans was criticized for not adequately considering the city's poorest residents. Many of these individuals didn't have personal transportation to evacuate before the storm, leaving them stranded in the city's flooded and devastated areas. The controversy extended to the highest levels of government as well. Then-President George W. Bush was criticized for his response, or lack thereof, to the disaster. His infamous "heck of a job, Brownie" comment to FEMA Director Michael Brown, who was widely seen as failing to handle the situation, became a symbol of the government's perceived indifference and incompetence. However, it's important to remember that the handling of Katrina was not just about failure. There were also stories of heroism and resilience. Local first responders, volunteers, and ordinary citizens stepped up, rescuing stranded residents, providing food and shelter, and offering comfort in a time of unprecedented crisis. But the overall image of the response to Katrina is one of a system that was unprepared and overwhelmed, a system that failed its citizens when they needed it most. This led to a significant loss of public trust in government, which continues to influence discussions about disaster preparedness and response. The aftermath of Katrina left a lasting impact on the region and the nation. It served as a stark reminder of the importance of effective disaster management and the dire consequences of getting it wrong. In the wake of Katrina, the long road to recovery began. The storm had left an indelible mark on the Gulf Coast region, changing the landscape both physically and culturally. But in the face of such overwhelming devastation, the spirit of resilience shone through. New Orleans, a city steeped in history and renowned for its vibrant culture, found itself at the epicenter of this catastrophe. The floodwaters receded, revealing a city in ruins. Homes, businesses, and lives had been washed away. Yet amid the wreckage, the resilient spirit of the city's inhabitants surfaced. People from all walks of life rolled up their sleeves and set to work. Neighbors helped neighbors, strangers helped strangers. Communities were reborn from the rubble, embodying a sense of unity and resilience that was awe-inspiring. The rebuilding process was far from easy. It required not only physical labor but also a profound emotional and psychological effort. The trauma of the disaster lingered, but the people of New Orleans and the wider Gulf Coast region were determined to reclaim their homes, their communities, and their lives. Government agencies, nonprofit organizations, and citizens alike worked tirelessly in the recovery efforts. Schools were rebuilt, businesses were reestablished, homes were reconstructed. And slowly, the vibrant rhythm of New Orleans began to pulse again. The recovery process also brought about significant changes. Lessons learned from the disaster led to improved flood protection systems, better disaster response strategies, and a stronger emphasis on community resilience. But the road to recovery was not just about rebuilding what was lost. It was about rebuilding better, stronger, and more resilient. It was about honoring the past while looking towards the future with hope and determination. The cost of Katrina was immense, not only in financial terms, but also in its impact on the nation. It served as a poignant reminder of the power of nature, the importance of preparedness, and the indomitable spirit of human resilience. But amidst the heartbreak and hardship, the story of recovery and resilience stands as a testament to the enduring spirit of the people of New Orleans and the Gulf Coast region. Hurricane Katrina stands as the costliest hurricane in U.S. history. It's not just the immediate destruction that makes it so, but the long-term effects on the economy, environment, and society. The storm inflicted an estimated $125 billion in damage, a financial burden that reverberated through the national economy. The environmental impact was equally devastating. Vital ecosystems were disrupted, leaving lasting scars on the Gulf Coast's rich biodiversity. The storm surge and flooding also led to severe soil erosion and water contamination, affecting agriculture and fisheries for years to come. The social cost was immeasurable. Lives were lost, communities were uprooted, and the fabric of the Gulf Coast was forever altered. The storm highlighted the stark disparities in wealth and access to resources, underscoring the need for equitable disaster response and recovery strategies. Katrina left behind important lessons about disaster preparedness and response. Katrina was a wake-up call for the nation in terms of disaster preparedness. That's undeniable. The hurricane exposed glaring inadequacies in our systems, from infrastructure to response mechanisms. It taught us the importance of preemptive measures and of swift, coordinated action in the face of disaster. The tragedy of Katrina was a catalyst for change. In its wake, we saw significant improvements in weather forecasting, allowing for earlier warnings and more time for evacuation. Emergency response procedures were overhauled, with agencies at all levels, local, state, and federal, now working more closely to ensure a more streamlined response. We also learned the value of community resilience. The spirit of New Orleans, its strength and determination to rebuild and recover, taught us that resilience is as much about people as it is about infrastructure. While we cannot prevent natural disasters, we can learn from them to better prepare for the future, and that, perhaps, is the most important lesson of all. The legacy of Hurricane Katrina serves as a stark reminder of the power of nature and the importance of preparedness. This catastrophic event, the costliest hurricane in U.S. history, left an indelible mark on the Gulf Coast region and the nation as a whole. It exposed the vulnerabilities of our cities, our infrastructures, and our disaster response systems. Yet amidst the devastation, we witnessed the resilience of communities, the bravery of first responders, and the enduring spirit of humanity. The aftermath of Katrina sparked a nationwide conversation about disaster preparedness and response, leading to significant improvements in these areas. The story of Hurricane Katrina is not merely a tale of destruction, but a testament to the power of human resilience and the lessons we learn from history. It is a stark reminder that we must remain vigilant, always ready to face the unpredictable forces of nature. Stay informed, stay prepared, and remember, history is our greatest teacher.